The night Jeremiah Whitlock threw Amara Johnson out of the glass-fronted mansion he liked to call his triumph, rain hammered the marble steps so hard it sounded like applause, and the white neighbors gathered under umbrellas laughed, as if the storm itself had come to celebrate her disgrace, their smiles sharp as the words Jeremiah spat when he told her a pregnant black woman with no money, no family name, and no future didn't belong in his world anymore. And Amara stood there clutching her swollen belly, barefoot, humiliated, while his mother Claire Whitlock sneered that the child might not even be his, and his business partners smirked as security dragged her suitcase onto the driveway like trash. And in that moment when humiliation burned hotter than the cold rain, Amara felt the baby kick, a soft, stubborn reminder that she could not collapse, even as laughter followed her down the long iron gates and into the dark road beyond, because she had nowhere to go except a motel on the edge of town, where the wallpaper peeled like old lies and the clerk looked at her with pity and suspicion. And she cried silently through the night, remembering how she had met Jeremiah years earlier when she was a law student with a scholarship and a mind that never stopped calculating angles, contracts, futures, while he had been a charming white heir with a failing real estate firm and a hunger for brilliance he could exploit, and she had helped him rebuild Whitlock Properties from the ground up, spotting undervalued land, navigating zoning laws, predicting market shifts with eerie accuracy. Yet every success had been credited to him, every contract signed in his name, every photo showing him shaking hands while she stood slightly behind, invisible, until pregnancy slowed her steps and Jeremiah's patience snapped, and by morning humiliation had curdled into a quiet resolve as Amara checked her phone, to find no missed calls, no apologies, only a text from Jeremiah's lawyer threatening her with silence if she dared claim anything. And she laughed bitterly at the audacity because they truly believed she was powerless. And when she went to the free clinic for a prenatal checkup later that day, a white nurse asked if she had support, and Amara almost said no before stopping herself, because support could come in unexpected forms, like the letter slipped under her motel door that evening, thick, cream-colored, sealed with a crest she hadn't seen since childhood, bearing the name Elias Rothman, a white man whose shadow loomed over skylines across continents, the reclusive billionaire known as the Ghost Landlord, and her hands trembled as she opened it to read words that made the room tilt, informing her that Elias Rothman had passed away and named her sole heir to his global real estate empire valued at $100 billion, effective immediately. And for a long minute Amara simply stared, heart-pounding, because Elias Rothman had been the man who quietly paid her mother's hospital bills when Amara was a teenager, the man who had recognized her genius during a summer internship she thought insignificant, the man who had taught her to read cities like living organisms and who had told her once, softly, that power should never be wasted on the ungrateful. And as shock gave way to clarity, she realized the cruel symmetry of timing. Days after Jeremiah kicked her out believing he had stripped her of everything, the world had shifted beneath his feet without him knowing, and rising tension threaded through her veins as she called the number at the bottom of the letter and spoke to a white attorney whose tone dripped skepticism until she answered his verification questions flawlessly, citing obscure property deeds and hidden subsidiaries only Elias's inner circle knew. And silence fell before he stammered an apology and scheduled a meeting, and as Amara hung up, she rested her hands on her belly and whispered that everything was about to change, though she kept the truth to herself, moving carefully, because power revealed too early could be stolen. And over the next 2 days she watched news reports of Whitlock Properties, celebrating a new development funded by loans she knew were fragile, watched Jeremiah boast on television about legacy and dominance, watched Claire Whitlock dismiss rumors of instability with icy confidence, and she smiled faintly, tension coiling as she prepared, attending the inheritance meeting in a borrowed dress while white executives eyed her with disbelief, some openly mocking the idea that a pregnant black woman could command such wealth, until documents were signed and accounts unlocked and the room shifted from laughter to fear. And though she left quietly, reversal of power already ignited as she instructed teams to freeze certain leases and quietly acquire controlling interests in companies Whitlock depended on. moves so subtle they felt like whispers. And by the time Jeremiah received notice that his credit lines were under review, Amara was sitting in a sunlit office high above the city that once mocked her, feeling the baby kick again, stronger now, as if sensing victory approaching, and she allowed herself one deep breath. Because humiliation had forged her resolve, tension had sharpened her patience, and the twist of fate had handed her the keys to an empire, and she intended to use every ounce of it, not for revenge alone, but for justice, dignity, and a future where her child would never be laughed out of a mansion in the rain. And as she gazed out at the skyline Elias once ruled, Amara Johnson smiled, knowing this was only the beginning. By the time dawn bled pale gold across the skyline, outside Amara Johnson's temporary penthouse office, the city that had laughed at her was already moving according to decisions she'd made in silence, and the rising tension inside her felt like a held breath stretched across miles of steel and glass. Because while the white executives of Rothman Holdings bowed politely now, their eyes still carried disbelief, the kind reserved for miracles they resented. And Amara sensed that respect built too quickly could just as easily curdle into rebellion. So she moved with deliberate restraint, authorizing audits, restructuring debt, and scheduling meetings that would ripple outward without revealing her hand, all while the baby inside her shifted restlessly as if urging momentum. And across town Jeremiah Whitlock sat smugly in a boardroom, surrounded by white men in tailored suits who laughed as his assistant whispered about frozen credit lines, dismissing it as a clerical delay, because Jeremiah still believed Amara was crying in some motel, broken and irrelevant. And Claire Whitlock reassured investors with her razor-edged smile that Whitlock Properties had weathered worse. Yet the cracks widened as contractors demanded payment and zoning approvals stalled, each obstacle traced invisibly back to subsidiaries now controlled by Rothman Holdings. And the tension escalated when a financial journalist broke the story that Elias Rothman's heir had finally been revealed, though no name was printed, only speculation. And Jeremiah scoffed on camera that whoever it was would be another old white titan, not realizing the irony curving toward him like a blade, while Amara sat in a private conference room meeting with Rothman's longtime counsel, a white woman named Meredith Klein, who admitted she had underestimated Amara until she saw her dissect portfolios with surgical precision. And Amara calmly corrected her that underestimation was a habit people regretted too late. Because every property told a story if you listened, and she listened now, mapping pressure points that would force Whitlock Properties into desperation, without ever revealing her presence. And when Meredith hesitated about the optics of a pregnant black woman assuming such overt control, Amara fixed her with a steady gaze and said optics were a privilege of the powerful, not a permission slip, and Meredith nodded, chastened, as Amara authorized the next phase, which included quietly buying the debt Jeremiah had leveraged his flagship development against, a project he had named Crown Vista, because irony, Amara thought, was always loudest in hindsight, and tension sharpened further when Jeremiah received notice that his majority stake was being diluted, prompting him to storm into his office and throw a glass paperweight against the wall, ranting about enemies and betrayal while his partners exchanged uneasy looks, because they'd begun to realize that someone unseen was tightening the net. And Claire Whitlock called in favors that returned only voicemail. And at night, Amara lay awake in her temporary apartment, one hand on her belly, thinking about humiliation and how it lingered even when power arrived. Because she remembered the rain on marble, the laughter, the way Jeremiah's eyes had hardened as if she were a stranger. And she promised herself that this reversal would not become cruelty, that she would end this cleanly, decisively, and with dignity. And the shocking twist drew closer when Rothman Holdings announced a surprise public appearance by its new owner at a real estate summit where Whitlock Properties was scheduled to present Crown Vista as the future of luxury living. And the city buzzed with speculation as white industry leaders mocked the mystery heir for theatrics, assuming another reclusive billionaire playing games, while Jeremiah prepared his speech, determined to reassert dominance, unaware that his words would soon collapse under their own arrogance. And the morning of the summit, Amara stood backstage in a tailored navy dress that framed her pregnancy proudly rather than hiding it, her hair pulled back, her expression calm, and white staffers whispered behind her, some glancing with pity, others with curiosity, none suspecting the storm she carried, until Meredith handed her the microphone and said softly that the room was full, and Amara inhaled, feeling the baby settle, as if ready, and stepped onto the stage to a murmur that rippled into laughter. When the audience realized the heir was a black woman, visibly pregnant, and Jeremiah froze mid-sentence as recognition slammed into him, disbelief draining the color from his face while white executives chuckled, thinking this was a joke, until Amara spoke with measured authority, introducing herself not as a victim, but as Elias Rothman's chosen successor, outlining Rothman Holdings' vision with clarity that cut through the noise, citing acquisitions, debt restructuring, and future plans that directly referenced Crown Vista's land parcels and financing structures. And the laughter died as comprehension spread, tension snapping into silence, and Jeremiah's hands trembled as Amara turned toward him, acknowledging Whitlock Properties' contributions, while calmly announcing that Rothman Holdings now held controlling interest in Crown Vista's debt, and would be assuming oversight effective immediately. And gasps filled the room as the reversal of power crystallized in real time, because the woman they'd mocked was dismantling an empire with words alone. And Amara felt a strange calm as she watched Jeremiah shrink, because humiliation had taught her patience, tension had honed her strategy, and now the twist revealed itself not as revenge but as truth. And as security approached Jeremiah to escort him off stage after his outburst, Amara concluded her address by dedicating the next phase of Rothman Holdings to ethical development and inclusive leadership, and the applause that followed was hesitant at first, then thunderous. And backstage Meredith exhaled in awe while Amara rested a hand on her belly, whispering that the world had shifted, and this time, she would not be pushed out in the rain. The fallout from the summit moved faster than rumor, cascading through boardrooms and penthouses as Amara Johnson's name finally appeared in headlines, beside figures so large they seemed unreal, and the white commentators who had laughed hours earlier scrambled to rewrite narratives, calling her a visionary, a surprise, an exception, while she watched calmly from her office as Whitlock Properties' stock plummeted, and Jeremiah's face appeared on screens pale and furious, shouting about ambushes and conspiracies, because the reversal of power had not only stripped him of control, but exposed how fragile his authority had always been without her mind propping it up. And when Claire Whitlock attempted a last-ditch meeting, demanding respect and threatening lawsuits, Amara agreed to see her, not out of fear but closure. And Claire arrived draped in pearls and entitlement, speaking to Amara as if she were still a misbehaving accessory, until Amara slid a folder across the desk detailing every clause Jeremiah had violated, every asset he had leveraged recklessly, and every legal pathway that led to his inevitable removal. And Claire's voice faltered as she realized there was no leverage left, no room to belittle, and she spat that Amara was vindictive, that this was revenge for humiliation, and Amara answered softly that revenge was loud and messy, but accountability was quiet and final. And as Claire left defeated, Amara felt the baby kick again, stronger, almost celebratory, and she smiled through a tightness in her chest, because victory carried grief too, the loss of a love she once believed in. And days later Jeremiah himself stood before her in a private mediation room, stripped of arrogance, eyes darting as if seeking allies who were no longer there. And he tried apology first, then anger, then desperation, reminding her of nights they'd planned futures together, accusing her of destroying him. And Amara listened without interruption until he finished, then told him that he had destroyed himself the moment he mistook her silence for weakness, the moment he thought marriage meant ownership, the moment he laughed while she stood in the rain pregnant and alone. And she reminded him that she had offered partnership once, freely, and he had chosen domination instead. And when he asked about the child, his voice cracking, Amara answered that the child would know truth, not bitterness, and that was mercy enough. And she signed the final papers that severed his control entirely, ending Whitlock Properties as he knew it, and as he was escorted out. Amara felt no triumph, only a deep exhale, because the story she had survived was closing, making room for something new. And in the weeks that followed, she moved Rothman Holdings toward projects that reflected her values: affordable housing mixed with green spaces, investments in communities long dismissed, and white critics questioned her motives while quietly benefiting from her competence. And she let results speak, because power that needed constant defense was already weakening, and the emotional weight of her journey settled into something steadier. As she prepared for motherhood surrounded by resources she once could not imagine, yet she never forgot the motel room, the peeling wallpaper, the way humiliation had nearly crushed her spirit, and she ensured no woman under her companies would ever be discarded so easily, instituting protections and equity that rippled outward. And one evening, as the city lights flickered on beneath her balcony, Meredith joined her with tea and admitted that watching Amara had changed her understanding of leadership. And Amara laughed softly, saying leadership was just responsibility carried honestly. And when the baby arrived early one morning amid a storm that echoed the night she'd been cast out, Amara held her child and felt a circle close, tears blurring her vision as she whispered promises of safety and possibility. And months later, she stood at the reopening of the very mansion Jeremiah had thrown her from, now converted into a foundation headquarters supporting women and families. And white donors applauded as she spoke, some still uncomfortable with the truth of how completely the power dynamic had flipped, but unable to deny the grace with which she wielded it. And as she finished, she looked out over the crowd and saw not enemies or allies, but witnesses, people who would carry this story forward whether they wanted to or not. The story of a pregnant black woman mocked and discarded who rose not by magic, but by intellect, patience, and connections earned through quiet excellence. And as applause swelled, she felt the weight lift at last, because the ending was not just satisfying but healing, a testament that humiliation could be transformed, tension endured, twists survived, and power reclaimed without losing one's soul. And as she walked off the stage holding her child, Amara Johnson knew that her greatest inheritance was not the $100 billion or the skyline bearing her influence, but the unshakable knowledge that no one would ever laugh her out of her own life again.